Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of KRAD COVID Readings. I'm Keith R.A. DeCandido, reading my writing to provide you with oodles of entertainment. Oodles of entertainment. I don't know where that came from. And if you find belches entertaining, then you've come to the right place, obviously. This is going to be part 2 of War Stories from the Star Trek Starfleet Corps of Engineers series. Before I do that, I want to mention that I'm involved in a new crowdfund. It's a Kickstarter for an anthology called The Four Somethings of the Apocalypse. It's from a new, very small press that my wife, Ren Sims, and I have started called Whisperwood. And this is alternate takes on the apocalyptic quartet of yore. Sure, you're familiar with the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, but what about the Four Lawyers of the Apocalypse, the Four Cats of the Apocalypse, the Four Squirrels of the Apocalypse, the Four Septuagenarians of the Apocalypse, the Four Development Executives of the Apocalypse, and so on. Lots of really cool authors like Jonathan Mayberry, David Gerald, David Mack, Peter David, Michael Jan Friedman, Robert Greenberger, Laura Ann Gilman, Jody Lynn Nye, Derek Tyler Attico, Mary Phan, Danielle Ackley McPhail, Adam Troy Castro, Dayton Warden Kevin Dillmore, and a whole bunch of other people I'm forgetting because I am a bearer of very little brain. But if you go to DeCandido.net, there is a link right there at the top of the page which will take you to the Kickstarter, or just go on to Kickstarter.com and search for Whisperwood. That's WHYSPERWUDE, 2 words. Or just search for the four question marks of the apocalypse, and you will find it. Please check it out. Please consider supporting it. You can just get the anthology if you want to do that, or you can get all sorts of really cool rewards like book bundles, autographed books, Tuckerizations, tote bags, other bits of swag, all sorts of cool stuff. Plus, if and when we pass our funding goal, there will be stretch goals as well. This continues until June 20th, so if you're watching this after June 20th, too late, but if you're watching it before then, if you're watching it on the 8th as when this goes live, or before the 20th at least, you can still support it. So please check that out. Anyway, moving on. We continue with the Starfleet Corps of Engineers series story, War Stories, Book 1, which will take us through June. This is giving us some of the tales from the Dominion War, featuring first Dr. Elizabeth Lense. The next week we'll kick off the portion that involves Bart Falwell, and then we'll move on to Commander Sonia Gomez. Anyway, without further ado, here is the Part 2 of Book 1 of War Stories. The smoky, metallic smell from the plasma fire lingered, but it was mixed with the equally metallic odor of blood. This wouldn't be unusual in the midst of a large-scale battle, but for the fact that it was all medical personnel. The biobeds were empty, but members of her staff were sprawled about. Juliana Cox lay on the floor, third-degree plasma burns all up and down the right side of her body. Next to her was Nurse Rogers, like burns on the left side. They were both dead. There was a giant hole where one of the bulkheads used to be, a force field over that hole through which you could see dozens of badly burned pieces of whatever normally was inside starship bulkheads. The fire suppression systems did work, she thought through the shock. Just not fast enough. She forced herself to look around. Triage, CU needs immediate attention. Half the equipment in sickbay was also burned. She heard moans and one person screaming. Nobody seemed to be in any shape to help out. "I need a doctor here!" That voice came from the doors, which had just parted to reveal a lieutenant she didn't recognize, carrying an ensign she also didn't recognize. This was due in part to the blood obscuring both their faces. Somewhere in the back of her head, she cursed Cox for not giving her crew adequate first aid training. The lieutenant was carrying the ensign like he was bringing his bride across the threshold instead of in a proper firefighter's carry, then remembered that Cox was laying dead at her feet. "Computer, activate EMH." A short, male human figure appeared in the center of the room. "Please state the nature of the medical emergency," the figure said in a haughty tone. "There's a war on," Lynn said dryly. "Examine the people on the floor. Do triage and treat the most gravely injured first. There's no support staff handy, so you have to find everything yourself." The EMH looked around. "I'm a doctor, not an archaeologist." "Move!" "Of course." The EMH knelt down to start examining those on the floor. Lense pointed to the lieutenant. You, set her down there. Then you sit here. I'm fine, Doctor. It's all her blood on me. I need to get back to engineering. She waved him off. Fine, go. Sickbay's supposed to be the best protected part of the damn ship, she thought as she ran a scanner over the ensign. The Jem'Hadar managed to penetrate it with one shot. It's ridiculous. They're supposed to build ships that are able to defend against our foes. As the biobed readings came through, broken arm, a combination of electrical and plasma burns on both legs, several cuts and contusions, and a concussion, Lense thought, of course we didn't know about the Dominion when they built the Lexington. She'd heard stories about how the Jem'Hadar could walk through force fields and had technology far beyond anything the Federation had ever seen. If we can't protect sickbay, how the hell are we going to protect the rest of the ship? She managed to stabilize the ensign and apply a dermal regenerator and a sedative. As long as she lay still and remained sedated, her body would eventually heal. I've completed the triage, the EMH said. 1 requires immediate surgery. 2 will require surgery within the next 3 hours. 3 are stable and sedated. The remaining 8 are deceased. Lense closed her eyes. She had sent 4 medtechs to the various parts of the ship to facilitate the transportation of wounded. She had been on the bridge. The EMH had just listed the remainder of the Lexington medical staff. Get started on the surgeries. Excuse me, the EMH said archly. We're about to get inundated with wounded, and we're a sick bay of 2. One of us needs to be able to diagnose in an instant and make judgment calls as to what treatment to perform. The other needs to perform those treatments. I think we know how that division of labor should go, yes? A logical course of action, I suppose. The EMH sounded almost grudging. Who the hell programmed this monstrosity, anyhow? So why are you standing around? Get to work on that patient who needs immediate surgery. There's no need to yell, Doctor, the EMH said as he went over to prepare for surgery. Of course, without a nurse, this will be most difficult. My heart bleeds for you, Lense muttered. Doctor? Lense turned to see that her metaphorical words applied to someone else in reality. A patient was being brought in on an anti-grav gurney, blood pouring from a chest wound. With a start, she recognized the patient as Jensen, one of the 3 medtechs she'd sent out, and she had no idea who it was navigating the gurney. What happened? She asked as she ran the scanner over the wound. Eyes widening as the tricorder told her that there was a massive arterial tear, she said, Never mind. Jensen had seconds at most. She took a quick look around, but the only instruments nearby were fried by the plasma fire. The spares were across the room in a drawer. They may as well have been in the Gamma Quadrant for all the good they did her right now. The hell with it. She shoved her decidedly non-sterile hand into Jensen's chest cavity and tried to close the arterial tear with her fingers. If she could just hold it shut, the blood would keep pumping. It was a ridiculous gesture. It had no chance of actually working. She could barely get a grip on the artery with the blood pouring out of Jensen's body, but she had to try. She looked up at the person who'd brought Jensen in and saw that he had 1 pip on his uniform. Ensign, get over to that set of drawers on the far wall, and the second from the top is a tray. Bring the whole thing over here, now! Yes, sir. The ensign sounded almost relieved to be given an order. It took the rest of Garth Jensen's life for the ensign to make it back with the tray. By then, he had lost too much blood. No amount of infusion would do the trick, especially given how much more he'd lose in the time it would take to repair the artery. Lense closed her eyes, counted to 5, then opened them. The smell got worse. Again, she asked, What happened? It all happened so fast. We were just standing there, down on deck 12, talking about something. The ensign almost giggled. I don't even remember. We were having one of those stupid arguments. It's about nothing at all, but neither side will ever back down for anything, no matter what the other one says. Lense bit her tongue. She had plenty of arguments like that on Starbase 314 recently. And then all of a sudden the red alert went off, and we all started to go to battle stations. And Jensen, I don't know why I remember this part particularly, but Jensen said to Halpern, Wilhoit, and Soriano, we better get a move on. And then, wait a minute, Lense said, stunned at this revelation. Those were the other 3 medtechs. Now that she had a moment to think about it, none of them should have been on deck 12. Jensen was supposed to be down in engineering, with Wilhoit on deck 20, Halpern on deck 8, and Soriano on deck 2. They were all together? Yes, sir, along with me and Ensign Hasegawa. We were all going to report to our duty stations when when the bulkhead ripped off. Lense recalled Wan's damage report. Hull breach on deck 12. The ensign shook his head. Soriano, Wilhoit, and Halpern were blown out into space, sir, along with Hasegawa. A piece of shrapnel tore through Jensen's chest before the force field kicked in. I don't know how I managed to make it through without a scratch. The ensign smiled, but like Captain Anderson's, it didn't reach the rest of his face. I guess I'm lucky, huh? He asked, not sounding like he felt in the least bit lucky. Go to your duty station, Ensign. I get the feeling they're going to need you, wherever that is. Mithras to sickbay. We've got wounded down here. Where the hell are your people? Lieutenant Commander Rachel Mithra was the chief engineer. They're all dead or incapacitated, Commander. Think. A transporter still operational? What difference does that make? Shields are up. Think inside the box, Commander. We can beam intra-ship with shields up, yes? What? Oh, yeah, of course, we can. Sorry, Doctor, it's a bit... Save it. Feed the coordinates of your wounded to the transporter room and beam them directly in here. For the next hour, the Lexington sickbay was unusually quiet. The EMH performed its surgical procedures with a minimum of fuss, a maximum of competence, and a healthy dose of smugness, but with no support staff, neither it nor Lense had anyone to talk to but each other, and Lense deliberately kept that interaction to a minimum. The only constant noise was that of the transporter as it beamed in the latest casualties, punctuated by the occasional scream of pain. The smell of blood got worse. Lense would have thought she'd get used to it. It took a brief lull to realize there were no other casualties being beamed in. She was about to contact the bridge for an update when Commander Galloway came stumbling in, carrying another crew member. In, Lense noted, a proper carry. She quickly took stock of the wounds on Galloway's head and torso. I'm fine, but Fournel here needs help. Galloway gently laid the officer down on a biobed. With a start, Lense realized it was the same bully in whose youth she'd been lamenting back on the bridge. Blue blood coated his entire right arm. We need to talk, Galloway said seriously after setting him down. Lense called the EMH over and had it work on Fournel, then regarded Galloway with an expectant look. Transporters are down. That was a very clever idea of yours, but the Jemadar made that impossible. The bridge has been compromised. Captain's setting up the auxiliary bridge with Juan. As Galloway spoke, she was clutching the right side of her belly with her right hand. The blood that covered that hand was red, so definitely didn't belong to Fournel. Tell me the rest while I examine you. I'll be fine, she said, backing out of sickbay. I saw about 10 other wounded people on the way here. Without the transporters, we'll never get them here. They're worse off than me. Be right back. Before Lense could say anything, she left. Lense was just starting to debate the efficacy of going after her when she heard a wheezing noise. Antonacci, one of the engineers, was going into shock. Damn it! More hours passed. She stabilized Antonacci. Then she and the EMH dealt with the casualties as Galloway and others brought them in. Some even made it in under their own steam. Too many of them died. Somehow Galloway kept coming in with more wounded, even though the red stain on her uniform jacket kept getting bigger each time. At least 5 people survived who wouldn't have without Galloway playing medtech. If I'd had the entire staff, if half my equipment hadn't been fried, if I'd been here the past month and not let discipline and training slip with my absence, it would still be a nightmare. People would still be dying, there'd just be more of us watching. The smell of blood never left her nostrils, and she was sure that it never would. Another hour, and the not especially reassuring voice of Heather Anderson sounded over the intercom. Attention all hands, this is the captain. We have destroyed the Dominion forces that tried to take Setlik. With the arrival of replacements from the 3rd Fleet, we're standing down from Red Alert. Once warp drive is repaired, we'll be setting course for Starbase 375 for repairs. When the captain signed off, the EMH approached. Lense wondered where Galloway was. She hadn't seen the first officer in quite some time. All the patients are stable, Doctor, and... Oh dear. What is it? Lense followed the EMH's glance. He was peering at the floor. She saw a figure sitting there, next to the corpse of Dr. Cox, staring lifelessly ahead, seated as if she'd plunked herself down there for a quick rest. Fiona Galloway. Damn it! Why didn't she let me help her? With surprising gentleness, the EMH said, because she thought it was more important to help others. Lense let out a very long breath. should have resigned, she thought. Not due to outrage at the way Starfleet treated her, but so she wouldn't have had to face this nightmare ever again. Anything to never smell the blood. Yeah. She shook her head. Come on, let's check on our living patients. Andrassy vessel overseen by Byron. Stardate 53678.4. Overseer Byron read through the logs from the U.S.S. Lexington with a mixture of admiration and confusion. The former came from Elizabeth Lense's ingenuity in accomplishing her appointed task with no staff and limited equipment. The latter came from that appointed task. In particular, the actions of Fiona Galloway filled him with utter confusion. Why would the Starfleet equivalent of a sub-overseer waste time and energy and sacrifice her own life just to preserve the lives of inferiors? It was an appalling misuse of resources. What did a mere engineer matter? Such people were easily replaceable. Someone who can perform the task of second in command of a ship, especially one as large as the U.S.S. Lexington, was a person for whom the preservation of life should have been a far greater priority. Byron was unable to determine why Dr. Lense had been temporarily reassigned to the Federation starbase designated number 314 for a month's time. He did, however, know that she specifically requested a transfer to the Starfleet Corps of Engineers after the war's end. Furthermore, he noted that she was the only doctor assigned to the U.S.S. Da Vinci, aside from an upgraded version of the Emergency Medical Hologram that assisted her during the combat in the Setlik star system. The U.S.S. Da Vinci was, after all, a much smaller ship than the U.S.S. Lexington, and did not require as extensive a medical staff. He mentally stored these pieces of information, along with the others he gleaned from his reading. Dr. Lense was a critical asset to the functioning of the vessel, given the obscene importance Starfleet placed on the lives of irrelevant life forms. That was something Byron knew he could exploit. Byron noted that several log entries were from the Federation starbase designated number 92. He soon realized that Bartholomew Falwell, the language and cryptographic specialist assigned to the U.S.S. Da Vinci Starfleet Corps of Engineers team, had been assigned there during the time period of the war. Confusingly, Falwell seemed to be of Starfleet's worker class, even though he obviously had the skills of an officer. I will never understand this Federation, he thought. Falwell had not been directly involved in either of Byron's previous encounters with the U.S.S. Da Vinci at either the Cardassian station Empok Nor or at the planet Meglin. Therefore, Byron was unfamiliar with him. Apparently, he was stationed at this particular starbase during the war and assigned to interpret and translate Dominion communication codes into something that could be read by the Federation. That is a valuable skill, Byron thought, and began reading. To be continued next week. We'll pick up with Bart Falwell's adventures on Starbase 92. Among other things, it chronicles his first meeting with his partner, Anthony Mark, and it should be pointed out that long before Commander Stamets and oh my god, I'm blanking on his name now. Wilson Cruz is the actor who plays him. Anyway, long before those two characters, we had a regular who was not heterosexual in the S.C.E. series going back to 2000 with Bart Falwell. I thought it was very important to do that since at that point the screen version of Star Trek had yet to actually give us a non-heterosexual character. Anyway, please tune in next week for part 3. Check me out online at DeCandido.net, which includes a link to the Kickstarter I mentioned at the top of the video for the 4 whatevers of the apocalypse. You can read my blog at decandido.wordpress.com, and please support me on Patreon at patreon.com/KRAD. You get all sorts of cool stuff there. Reviews, vignettes, cat pictures, all sorts of stuff. Thank you very much. Please stay safe, and I'll see you next week. Bye.